Welcome to A Growing Concern. It's been 3 weeks since we've been on, so I was kind of missing it. There's been a lot of talk in the Northwest recently about the Eagle Creek fire. And, you know, one time or another, we always talk about fire. We always talk about the forest here in the Northwest because it's you know, what the Northwest is known for. And with this recent Eagle Creek fire, it was in the news for a while, and it's going to go away maybe a little bit. And I don't want it to go away. I think we need to talk about it. And we have Alex Harris here tonight with Oregon Wild. He's the, let me think if I remember this now. You're the public lands coordinator.
That's right.
And from that title, it's obvious that that you're all about the public lands, and that is what the Eagle Creek is. But there's public lands all over this country, and I think a lot of people don't really understand how much of what public lands are in this country, and I'm sure you'll be able to talk a little bit about that. But first, just a little bit about yourself. You say you're from Southern Oregon.
Yep.
Were you getting active down there?
Well, I grew up there. I grew up just outside of Ashland, so I've been on public lands since I was just a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Been always passionate about it, but it's not until I moved here to Portland that I started working on public lands advocacy. Before my time with Oregon Wild, I was working on climate work with the Sierra Club. I worked with a bunch of other coalition partners on defending against the wide array of proposals to exploit the Columbia Corridor for fossil fuel export. So that's kind of how I got my start in the Portland scene, and I now work with Oregon Wild on public lands.
Well, thank you for your work against turning the Columbia River into a coal chute,
Yeah.
which is basically what they were trying to do, and they are still trying to do it.
Yeah, with oil and natural gas and methanol.
Yeah,
Yes.
we could easily get off onto that, but I'm gonna rein myself in and try to stick to the subject. We've covered that an awful lot on this program because it's just, you know, what it was Pembina or the different Longview, or all the different things that are, you know, it's never going to go away. They're going to keep trying, just like it's never going to go away. They're going to keep trying to drill, you know, up in the Arctic, and it doesn't become any less safe or any less an outrage, but you know, they figure, you know, you throw enough things at the wall, eventually something's going to stick, and that's what's going to be going on with the recent attempts for Congress to pass some laws that allows them to completely go around the laws for logging and to stop lawless logging. And you know, I know after the Biscuit Fire in Southern Oregon, which you probably were aware of when that one happened, even though you were pretty young.
Yeah.
And then there was the Chetco fire down there now. So I imagine whatever's being done up here is being done down there.
Totally. Yeah, parts of the Biscuit Fire of 2002 actually burned in the Chetco bar fire, which was Oregon's largest fire this year.
So that means it came back in however many years, enough to burn.
Yes.
And was it areas that had been logged that burned, or was it areas that hadn't been touched?
You know, a lot of that area is so rugged and so wild that there aren't many roads out there. There's not a lot of logging in parts of the Kalmiopsis-Siskiyou Range. And it's a part of the state that regularly has burned for a very long time, for thousands of years. And so these fires are oftentimes seen as destructive, but they're not. They're necessary for the ecological health of the region. And that doesn't just apply to the Kalmiopsis-Siskiyou, but other parts of Oregon's forest land.
Sure. Well, you know, the forests, all of them are special, but you know, some are more special than others. And the Kalmiopsis is special, and so is the Columbia Gorge.
Yeah.
And of course, it's way up there on the top of everybody's list because, you know, I can't remember, was it 3 million? 2 million people at least live in the Portland metro area, and it's accessible from people from Vancouver and which might be included in the metro area now that I think about it. But it's very well known. And actually, we have some pictures, and we might start putting up some of those pictures. I was going to do this later. That wasn't a very nice picture. They're going to work on that. We've got some photographs that I want to give Trip Jennings, who I haven't never met, but he's been out there in the trenches for a while. In fact, I think he even did some work back at the Standing Rock a while back. Here we go. There's one. Now that doesn't show all. The fire on that doesn't look like it's been down there on the lower area.
Yeah, this looks like it's closer into Portland. Tripp went up with a few folks, took these aerial shots maybe 2 weeks ago.
Was that in a plane or a drone?
Yep, it was in a plane.
I thought it was drone. Okay.
And actually got some footage of the flyover, and just today the Oregonian published that footage. And
Oh, all right. Good deal.
People have been checking that out and sharing it. It's been really nice to see people still interested in the Eagle Creek fire.
Here's another one. It looks like a lot of that was burnt.
Yeah, this might even be, let's see, I'm not sure which canyon that is. Parts of it, and so what we've learned about the Eagle Creek fire since the flames have started to subside, is that parts of it did burn more severe. Other parts weren't actually burned at all, and then there were lots of parts that had mixed severity. So low burn that didn't hurt the older, trees with thicker bark, the old growth forests that had never been logged before, and other parts had been, somewhat burned. But overall, from what we can tell from these aerial photos and the footage we've received, is this mixed mosaic burn was actually very beneficial from an ecological standpoint. This area has burned many times, of course, as all forest lands.
Over the millenniums.
Yep.
I think they get a stand replacing fire every 400 or 500 years on this side, I think, something like that.
Yeah, and so each ecosystem's a little different, but right here along the Cascade Crest and into the gorge, it has its own regime, but forest fire is a necessary part of that ecosystem, just as other natural forces, sunlight, rain. These kinds of natural disturbances are actually necessary from an ecological standpoint.
They're just part of it, just like the water that's running, running down the low watersheds and down out to sea.
Sure.
Fire is part of that whole process.
And it always has been and always will be.
It always will be after we're long gone, unless we cut them all down.
Yeah, sure.
And we're getting back to that. That's what they're trying to do. But some of those shots showed how it was burnt really bad and it was really steep.
Yes.
And then one showed it where it burned up and then kind of over the lip, and then it was green from there.
Yep.
And another one showed where it was a little valley where it was green, and from that valley it can replenish itself.
Yeah, well, I think the characteristics of the gorge are so unique that this fire was somewhat unique. Just given the strong wind gusts that fed the fire.
First east and west and
Yes,
back and
and
forth.
Portland felt a little bit of that. I
Oh,
remember
boy, did
one
we.
morning I woke up and my front yard was covered in a blanket of ash.
Yeah.
And then other days the wind would blow to Hood River and Portlanders forgot about it while it still raged on.
Yeah.
But that made for an interesting fire. The sheer geography, of course, made for those certain fire characteristics. But overall, the burn was not catastrophic, as the media has been characterizing it as. They've been characterizing it as the gorge is lost and gone and destroyed.
Yeah, from Council Crest, not Council Crest, but from that one point there.
Angel's Rest.
Right, Angel's Rest,
Yeah.
all the way to wherever. It was total devastation, and
Yeah.
that's not the way fire burns.
And that's not what we've seen with these photos. And the gorge is going to be a fascinating place to visit in the coming months and years, because we'll see this forest recover in the natural way that it always has recovered. And if you've ever been to a burned forest, you know what I'm talking about. You see incredible diversity of insect species and woodpeckers, and a lot of wildlife actually prefer this kind of habitat.
Actually, I read somewhere that the only thing that even comes close to the biodiversity of a old growth forest is a burnt forest. I forget where I saw that. It was somebody posted, I think Michael Donnelly posted something like that on Facebook, that because of, not right away, but as the insects move in and then the predators move in, and it is very much more biodiversity. Maybe more, it stabilizes with less of a biodiversity through time. But in the very beginning, there's an awful lot that moves in, because it's a complete new habitat.
Totally. Yeah. Some of that dense forest, there hasn't been exposed sunlight like that for a long time. So, species can move in and take advantage of that extra sunlight and extra water and whatnot. But that's the thing. We're talking about science. We're using scientific facts to express the benefits of fire. And that's exactly what certain politicians are exploiting, people's lack of scientific literacy.
Nice segue.
Right? And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
These politicians are basically appealing to fire as this catastrophe that we need to get in there, cut all the trees down, get those dead trees out, and then replant for the ecological health and forest resilience. They're using all this fancy language to basically say, let's log places that have never been logged before.
And let's make it a tree farm.
Let's make the Gorge a clear-cut tree farm. That's right.
And there's different bills you were talking about before we went on camera. I know that Walden has one, but he's not the only one, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'll start with Walden's bill. It was introduced maybe about 3 weeks ago, not too long ago.
Like he had it ready.
And it seemed like he did. It seems like he's been thinking about this for a while. And a lot of politicians have. Salvage logging is what it's called.
Yeah.
It's nothing new. We call it post-fire logging because salvage kind of connotes you make the best of a bad situation. So it kind of frames fires as bad.
As management.
Yes.
We're being managed.
Yeah, exactly. So post-fire logging is basically a way of saying it's logging that takes place on forests that have experienced some kind of fire. So Walden's bill is essentially a bill to expedite the process that the Forest Service would need to undergo to log the gorge. It would not only allow the gorge to be logged, but would expedite that process. And in order to expedite the logging process in public land, you need to circumvent certain environmental regulations that Congress has put together, such as provisions of the NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, one of our core bedrock environmental laws. It would be circumvented in order to make way for this expedited logging process.
Yeah, basically what they're saying is the main thing that they do with these is to really seriously curtail, if not completely get rid of, public comment.
Yeah. So the public process would be one of those things that's lost in this under this bill if it were to pass. Something else that would be lost is the scientific and environmental review. The Secretary of the Department of Agriculture who could decide without consulting other agencies whether or not there are endangered species or other, certain species, wildlife concerns that need to be addressed. So there would be little scientific review there. There would also be less environmental process and other standard parts of the logging process that happens on public lands. So it's concerning for a variety of reasons, but essentially it cuts out the public and it strips the environmental and scientific review that generally takes place on public lands.
Well, I know during the Biscuit Fire there was, not that people from Portland and more populated areas didn't weigh in, but that area down there, the Chetco Fire, it's not as populated, even though there's 250,000 people in the Medford area. Up here, there's a lot of people, and there would be an awful lot of public input on the gorge. I mean, people were just crying about that gorge, and people maybe don't get out into the woods much, but it's a straight shot up that Interstate 84, and to there. And like you mentioned, Angel's Rest. I know someone who went up there once a week for a while, and I'd never climbed it, but there is a lot of areas up there that are very accessible, and they may not be anywhere where people want to go right now due to the landslide possibilities and the things that could happen. But but to me, the biggest danger is the public input on this, because I remember a while back, I think it was during the Biscuit Fire and George Bush, there was some kind of provision that they had. I don't know what it was. Is if they want to put in another or change a couple, 3 campgrounds, redo the picnic benches and all that, they just do away with the usual rules that makes them do that. Well, they were trying to apply that to the whole thing about clear cutting and timber sales, and they got away with that in places. I wish I remember the name for that. If Bark was here, they could tell me.
Yeah,
they know all that, but there's so many slick ways they try to get around it, and people are busy. They have busy lives. They're not experts on fire. They're not experts on natural forces that are going on out there, and it's easy to keep them from understanding what's really going on.
Yeah.
And these two bills two different people are putting these forward.
Yeah.
Is the second one that you mentioned pretty much the same thing?
So the second one is probably what Oregon Wild and a lot of other environmental groups are more worried about. It's far more viable.
So they're not directed specifically towards one place. They're a general.
Yeah, so there's the Walden bill.
Yeah.
And then the other bill is called the Resilient Federal Forest Act, House Bill 2936. And it's been introduced by a representative from Arkansas. So it's being considered right now in front of several committees in the House of Representatives. It's essentially a bill that would radically reform the way we do forestry in the West. It's complicated, as any forest policy is, but I like to boil it down into three main thrusts. One is that it seeks to dramatically up the cut in the state of Oregon specifically. So in southwestern Oregon, there's this public land that is managed by the Bureau of Land Management, BLM.
Bureau of Logging and Mining, I always call it.
Yeah, that's also another name for it. These lands are called the ONC lands. And they're lands,
Oregon, California lands.
You got it.
Yeah.
So they have a long history, and they're the target of this bill. So the first big thing this bill does is require the BLM and other public entities to log these forests at 3 times the rate that they're currently being logged. And that would be the minimum. It would require a floor of 500 million board feet a year, which would be dramatic. You couldn't reach that number without cutting old growth forest. And that's where the second part of the bill comes in. You would need to circumvent certain environmental process in order to cut old growth, in order to eliminate habitat for endangered species. You'd have to circumvent the environmental laws that we passed decades ago. And that's what this bill would do. It would create these categorical exclusion zones, CEs, what people call
That might have been what I was talking about a while ago, the CEs.
Yeah, we've seen them before. And they currently exist. The Forest Service, when they're building a fence or maybe painting a shed, they will apply for a CE, a categorical exclusion, which will allow them to do a project without undergoing public process or environmental review. But what this bill would do is say if the Forest Service wants to do 6 different kinds of logging for insect disease control, for fuels reduction, so thinning, or the third one, timber production. For timber production, you can apply for a categorical exclusion, which means you don't need to go through the environmental process or the public process that you generally have to before these large logging projects.
I don't understand what Congress doesn't get about the laws are put there for a reason. And they just keep going over the top, not just for logging, but for other things as well. And that's pretty frightening if they even consider doing such a thing, because to bump that up 300% plus 300%, a lot of that land is fairly steep. You're not going to get up 300% on low elevation lands. Plus, the most sawmills are set up for smaller.
Yeah,
they're not set up for bigger trees.
There are a few mills left that still
some
process
left.
old growth, which is amazing to me.
I'm surprised.
As a young person growing up in this world, it's amazing that we still target old growth. When the vast majority of the state has been logged, we still target places that have never been logged before. Which brings me to the third point of this bill. There are going to be certain wilderness areas and the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument, certain parts of those areas in southern Oregon that are currently protected under either the authority through the president or through Congress. Those areas would be revoked, and instead of being protected, they would be required to be managed for maximum timber production. So in other words, certain BLM lands in the Wild Rogue area, the Wild Rogue Wilderness, the Table Rock Wilderness, parts of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument.
I hope not Opal Creek.
Not Opal Creek.
Not yet.
Part of the Soda Mountain Wilderness area. Certain lands that are ONC lands would be basically taken from the highest protection of wilderness, what we call the gold standard. And instead they'd be managed for primarily timber production. So basically from the best designation to the worst designation. And the goal is simple: to target parts of the state that have been protected through public process, to target those old growth forests that have never been logged before, and essentially to circumvent these environmental protections and these environmental laws that we've worked so hard to designate.
That's just the point I was going to make, is it's been fighting forever. I first got active, media activism a lot now, but originally it was in the early 90s. It was over in Nola Hill and some of the local timber sales here, and we won some, lost some. We won Eagle Creek, which is a different Eagle Creek. It's an Eagle Creek which is out towards Estacada, and it's been a struggle ever since. I mean, it's never going to end, it seems like, because there are people who just don't have enough money. Apparently, even though they have half of it, I forget the statistics, but the majority of the profit and the money that's being made in the last X amount of years has gone to the top 1%, and everybody else has to share what's left. And this is just going down that same road. There'll be a few people get jobs, even though most of these sawmills and the logging is mechanized now. You got something called a feller buncher that'll go up, cut the tree, strip the branches, cut it into lengths, and then load it on a truck. What do you need anybody?
All one or two people running these projects.
Yeah. And so that it wasn't the environmentalists that stopped the logging in the Northwest. It was the greed and the mechanization.
Sure.
And the mechanization is going to probably continue, although I don't see how much more how many people's jobs they can take out of the mix anymore, because they've just about got it down to 2 or 3 people can log a unit.
Yeah. Our efforts to protect old growth forests and special places in Oregon are not over. We have a lot of work to do. And most of the work I do is about keeping public lands. So over half of the state is publicly owned. It means you can hike or fish or hunt on those lands, national forest, BLM land. My job is to keep those public. That's what I advocate for. Make sure that we don't sell national forest land or these other cherished public places stay in public ownership for us to all use. So there's multiple use and there's protection for future generations.
And kick the freaking cows off.
Yeah, well, that's a management decision, but the ownership question, and this is somewhat new. We've seen the dominant political party in our country, the Republican Party, adopt an explicitly anti-public lands agenda. They're pursuing an agenda to transfer more federally managed land to the states, so the states can manage and exploit those lands as they see fit or sell them. And also, there's been several proposals this year in Congress by Republican legislators to sell land, not just transfer, to privatize public land. There was a bill actually earlier this year introduced by Jason Chaffetz, a Utah representative, and the bill called for 3.3 million acres of public land owned by you and me and every other American. These 3.3 million acres would have been sold, liquidated to the highest bidder, and the bill was so controversial, it received such a wild backlash that within 10 days of introducing the bill, Chaffetz withdrew his support from his own bill and said, I no longer support this.
I think he recently retired too.
And he's now leaving Congress. Yes.
Good riddance.
Yeah.
Why is it that folks, what was it, Oklahoma you mentioned earlier, somebody was putting one in, and in Utah, not that these places may or may not have some trees, but they're not treed like the Northwest.
No.
The people in the Northwest, I remember a while back, many years ago, and I wish it was still there was something called Zero Cut, which was a reclamation and restoration act of something put forward by a Midwest Republican, and Cynthia McKinney was on that. And it was to just stop the logging in national forests, which originally there was laws back in the late 1800s that stopped it, and to just put the money that's coming into them into restoration, because there's 30 times as much money being made from these areas, from tourism and recreation, and there is from logging. They're losing money.
Yeah.
I know Barks I forget how they had things out there. They were, like how the Willamette lost $2 million one year, and we're giving this stuff away. And it's going to be the same thing coming up. They're going to get these. Has there been any talk about how much they're going to be buying these logs for? I bet since they're burnt, it's going to be cheap.
Yeah.
It's like Nestle buying water for nothing.
It's really unprecedented. We're getting down to the last protected areas, the gorge or wilderness areas in southern Oregon that I mentioned, that have been set aside to be protected, and they enjoy broad public support. Now these politicians are so ambitious. They're so, I don't know what to call it. They're so enthusiastic about the idea of logging and extractive industry, that they are now going to these places, the Gorge or Southern Oregon, these protected areas, to extract more timber, to up the cut, and to turn the rest of the state into industrial forest land.
I'm sure it has nothing to do with campaign contributions, right?
I'm sure nothing.
I'm just being cynical. Yeah. I know that a while back, I don't remember when, it might have been sometime after President Clinton was here, that they made this bunch of rules. They had lands that are matrix lands and lands that are all set aside for this. And some of the stuff that was set aside had already been logged. So it was second and third growth already. So they played a lot of little games with the numbers and gamed the system that way. But there were matrix lands, and I don't remember the terminology for some of the other lands. But that is the designations that you're talking about are going to get broke down.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and we'll see more and more of it. And these are designations of public land management, right? These BLM lands that are matrix lands or wilderness, that's all about management of public land. And it's not only there are a bunch of proposals to erode management standards, but also public ownership itself is now experiencing an existential threat.
That's a good way to put it. That's
liquidated. I mean, they will be privatized for timber companies to exploit. We saw the Elliott State Forest earlier this year. The Elliott was a piece of public land on the Coast Range.
We had folks talking about that on here.
Oh, yeah. Great.
What's his, Salinger from Audubon Society.
Bob Salinger. Yeah. We work with the Portland Audubon and a lot of coalition partners on that. And Oregon Wild's role was, its own role, that we really needed a bunch of different roles for that victory. But essentially, our state leaders, the three senior leaders of the state, the Secretary of State, the Treasurer, and the Governor, all voted to sell this forest because they decided they couldn't manage the forest while following Endangered Species Act, the law that we passed in the 70s. And so they said, instead of us trying to figure out how to manage this land and follow the law,
let's just destroy it.
Let's just sell it, because private companies don't have to follow those same laws. They follow different laws. And that was their logic. So it was actually, the sale was proceeding when grassroots organizations around the state mobilized.
Boy, did they scream.
And it was loud, and media picked it up. And I think this has to do partially with where Oregon's at right now. We're ready for progress. We're ready for movement on climate, on forest policy, but our leaders are still beholden to a 20th century model of what to do with the timber industry. You can't piss off the timber industry. And
kind of like the NRA.
Right. These industries have such clout that politicians and elected officials just stay away from these issues altogether.
Mining and cattle is the same way.
Yeah. Oil and gas. So you mentioned Utah. Oil and gas is what they have to worry about. Here in Oregon, it's not as much oil and gas. It's much more about timber.
And we're having to go up against these dinosaurs. But during the dinosaur age, they disappeared, and all them little shrews and mammals that were crawling around in the dirt, they survived.
Yeah.
And so that's I don't consider myself a shrew, but I think that was a terminology for it. And but they eventually were the mammals of the time, and they developed.
It's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
And the dinosaurs don't make it.
Yeah. There's a rising tide, and those who are beholden to a distant age, they're going to go extinct. You're right.
And unless they take us all with it.
I have faith. I kind of need to. I'm optimistic.
I am too, pretty much.
Yeah. And I definitely love talking about all these issues with people who are much more pessimistic than I am. It helps ground me, but I have seen such amazing things this past year alone with the Elliott State Forest, or what's going on with the Trump administration's attack on Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. The kind of grassroots opposition to these proposals is incredible. People are getting engaged. They're making the regular phone calls. They're showing up to town halls. They're donating and participating with nonprofits that they believe in. there's so much going on that it makes me optimistic. So
Yeah.
I think we can make it through this tough time.
And not to mention they pissed off the natives in Standing Rock and got everybody, realizing how the natives have been treated and the racism has been going on there, and how that war against the indigenous population has never ended. And people have always supported the natives, even though they didn't necessarily know it. They realized that John Wayne was a jerk, in all the movies. And the movement now is to understand that what they have been saying all along, mother, you don't want to have to look at her as your mother, but at the same time, she's how, that is where you live, and they have to take care of these things. And I think more and more people are becoming aware that it's either looking like that as a source of our life, or look at it as a resource to be extracted. And this one goes down a really bad road. And it just seems like if we continue to resource extract and come up with these rules and these laws that allow us to circumvent the laws, there's not going to be a whole lot left. As I remember, was it 3 to 6% of our native forest remains?
Yeah, I've heard different numbers.
Different numbers all over the place, but pretty much all the low elevation.
The primary forest that was once here is almost entirely gone.
Yeah, I don't know if you know of Native Forest Council out of Eugene.
Yeah, heard of them.
They've been around a long time, and they had a newspaper out for a while that showed the graduation of how it was then and how it is now. And And there's not much, and a lot of that is high elevation. And let's hope they don't develop a way to go after that high elevation.
Well, Cascade Siskiyou is a great example.
Is it?
Here's this high elevation forest where 3 mountain ranges collide. It's protected as a national monument. It was designated originally in 2000 by President Clinton, and then expanded about 9 months ago by President Obama before he left office. And the monument's amazing. I grew up less than a mile from the monument,
all right.
so I'm a little bit biased.
Yeah,
but it's a truly spectacular place in terms of the diversity of wildlife there, the public access, the kinds of recreational opportunities on that 110,000 acres, whatever it is. It's truly incredible. In fact, I wish I had a picture to show, but just last weekend, I was down in the Cascade Siskiyou, and I harvested about 10 pounds of chanterelle mushrooms.
All right, just like here up in the northwest forest.
Yeah,
then.
and the mushroom season is here, and it's a really special forest down there. It's very healthy, and it's been protected for a while. And the Trump administration has just recently announced, well, they actually didn't announce, it was leaked by the Washington Post.
Good for them.
Yeah, they're on fire with all these leaks. But the leak showed Secretary Zinke had proposed to Trump that 4 monuments around the country are shrunk in size. These
I remember
monuments
reading about that.
Yeah, it's been in the paper a lot. One of them is the Bears Ears National Monument.
That's the one I was trying to think of earlier.
That's probably the most controversial one. A lot of fossil fuel interests and other extractive interests are trying to repeal the monument altogether, despite the fact that it hosts countless heritage sites for native peoples in the area, and it also is a spectacular, the geography down there and the ecology is amazing. The second one that is going to be, the Trump administration wants to shrink is also in Utah, no surprise. The Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. The third is the Gold Butte National Monument in Nevada, and then the fourth is the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument in southern Oregon. And if you can think of, if you've ever driven south on I-5, you've been to Ashland or done the Siskiyou Pass, the mountains that you see all around, that rim of mountains, is the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument. It's Pilot Rock, it's the Green Springs, it's Jenny Creek, and Grizzly Peak. That whole area is the Cascade Siskiyou, but they want to shrink it so they can log the ONC lands, which we were talking about earlier, to log these lands that some of them have never been logged before, and support amazing wildlife habitat and its intact primary old-growth forest.
Sounds like it's a lot different down there than here. That's kind of spread out all over the place, whereas we got the gorge with one highway going up it.
Yeah.
you know, and all the population here, and there's so much damage that could be done. Is there been any talk about specifically, like you're talking about the national monuments down there? This isn't a national monument, but it's a national scenic area.
That's
Now,
right.
there's a whole range and categories of different things: national monuments, scenic areas, and there's a couple, 3, 4 more, I think, as well, that are protected, varying degrees of protection. And I think probably scenic area might be down towards the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
No, but generally scenic areas are not logged, right? So what we're seeing with Walden's proposal is to basically log an area that has been set aside for the purpose of not logging, right? As not timberland. We set it aside long ago to be protected, but now Walden's bill is calling for that designation to be circumvented. And not only would it be logged, it would require the Department of Agriculture to have an expedited timeline on logging. So it just adds insult to injury. They're going far beyond just eroding some management designations. They're getting deep into basically repealing all the progress we've made in the last 100 years as a country.
Well, people that the viewers, they may or may not understand what logging means, but even on fairly level areas, there's ground compaction. There's a mycorrhizal fungus that lives under the ground that connects the trees. That's the ground is a living thing as well as what's above the ground. All that will be damaged and destroyed. And it's not just that they're going to go in there and take some trees and they're going to plant some trees. And what could be wrong with that? Well, I just mentioned a couple, 3, and there's a lot more than that. I mean, they're going to have to put roads into it. Roads are going to create erosion. I mean, isn't there already talk on the news about there could be some erosion happening and landslides through the winter just without doing anything?
Yep. Yeah, and burned areas are generally very sensitive to all sorts of human impacts, but commercial, industrial, clear-cut logging is perhaps one of the most destructive acts that people can do on a forest. Probably the most. And
a lot more so than fire.
Yes, that's right. And these areas need to recover naturally. They historically have. It's not like these forests were unhealthy in the long periods of time before Westerners, Europeans arrived. These forests have been burning for a long time and will naturally recover. They don't require industrial clear-cut logging to save them. I'm not sure what the logic is that Walden and others are appealing to, but it's some kind of hubris that we need to do something to save the gorge by logging it. It's really a perverse bill, and it's pretty clear to see the actual motivation.
Well, I was going to say, well, it's the conceit of management, but hubris is a better way to put it.
Yeah, I like your term. No, that's a good one. Yeah.
Because I'm sure you can go in there and you can plant, and then you may bring things back. But I've seen that's what got me active in the first place, was getting out in the forest, running the dog, cutting firewood. I've seen some of these clear cuts that it's a tree farm if it comes in, and a lot of times it doesn't come in, and then they have to use the poisons and stuff to keep down the underbrush, which will grow faster than the trees, and which it's an organism out there that has insects and animals and birds and all that. That's a unit, and they're tearing apart that unit. And that unit will continue as that unit on its own. But we go in there and mess with it, and it's going to change the whole dynamic.
That's right. Yeah, I'm actually really excited to go back to the gorge, because what makes the gorge so amazing? It's the geography and it's the health of the native forest. Both things will still be there. In fact, they might be more pronounced. We'll see fire characterize the landscape in parts, which will be beautiful for its own in its own way. And we'll also see, the views from the gorge will now be amazing. When you walk through a burned forest, the visibility is incredible. There's no canopy. There's, especially in really burned areas where there's not much left, the visibility will be really amazing. So the prospect that the gorge is lost forever, that we need to grieve, fire, is very misguided. What we actually need to be worried about is proposals to log it, proposals to get rid of this healthy and natural place.
When I was videotaping the monthly hikes for Bark, we went on a couple post fires, and I can't remember. One was some lake. Both of them were on the north side of Mount Hood, and the name keeps coming to me. Then it goes back away. But we went in there. Maybe even gone in there since. I haven't taped them, but. I think within a year we went back. It was near Cooper Spur, and we were going up this. And on both sides of the trail, you could see little trees coming up on their own, but you could just see lupins and bear grass and all the different things that were coming up. It was gorgeous, and you had dead burnt trees, but it was just, you know, it was a wonderland of its own. Not the same one, but you know, we need to readjust how we look at things.
Yes.
I think is what you're saying,
Yeah.
you know, and I see exactly what you mean just from walking up that trail.
Totally.
And I wish I remember the names of that, but it's been a couple, 3 years now. I'm sure it's a lot different than that now, because those trees, they grow up pretty fast.
Yeah.
And the trees that are indigenous to the area will grow up, not us bringing in Douglas fir or whatever in order to be able to log it
Exactly.
in our slow motion clear cutting down the road.
Totally.
So-
Yeah, these forests exist on a continuum, and they've historically burned, they'll burn again, and we need to look at fire as just one stage on that continuum. And when you look at it that way, it helps understand what's going on with fire and how your initial reaction, that the flame and the charred trees are all bad. It might be like some deep part of the human experience where we've always historically run and fled fire, and it's meant destruction. But it doesn't mean that on a scientific or ecological, from that perspective, it's actually pretty clear that this is just one natural stage of a continuum.
It's a natural stage that the primitive peoples, primitive, I shouldn't use that word because I think we're the ones that are primitive, but the people in the past have used fire to burn over areas in order to plant.
Yep.
And you know, that reminds me of what we were talking earlier. This is actually fertilizing the area, just like Mount St. Helens fertilized that area, and immediately things are coming up. I know growing around Mount Shasta, it was always dusty and gray, and I always wondered, you know, God, it's terrible. But I got to realizing later, well, that's just ash from the ancient volcanoes, and that's the reason why my grandfather had you know, squash that was this tall, because it's fertilized.
Yeah.
And this is what's going on up there, and we had some of that coming into the town here, and
Totally.
it showed up in our water buckets and on our plants, and you could see all them different sizes of ash.
And the soil will recover, and now it's at the point where if we were to go in there with industrial practices and commercially log the gorge, clear cut, there would be all sorts of destruction done to the soil itself, which would only make it more difficult for this forest to recover.
That mycorrhizal fungus will connect back up, but not if it's crushed.
Totally.
So yeah, that is something that, in fact, I think Bark might be doing their yearly mushroom hike this coming weekend. They might be. I don't know if Mark's going to be doing that or not. They're probably full up. I mean, they had to cut it off because there was times when we had 60 people going on. And that's just too much logistically impossible to run that. But some of the things Mark taught me about what's going on out there with the forest, where they would put some radioactive phosphorus, and then within hours it would be 100 feet away in a tree, because it would just, you know, it's all connected, you know, and the forest fire is part of that connection.
Totally.
It's something, you know, that you've emphasized in your own words many ways, and I've learned that too, and it's something that. Before we get off the air here, we got 15 minutes left. We can continue on. We actually have a little video that we just pay part of it. But you might mention a little bit more about those bills. And I want to get the viewers on board with this and realize that this is going to go through unless people raise the cry they did when you were talking about the one that we stopped.
Sure.
So we got the two bills coming up, and there's, you know, that is just for having to do with specifically the Northwest Forests?
Well, actually, no. So Walden's bill applies to all national scenic areas.
Oh, okay.
That's the thing. People have been talking about it in terms of the gorge, which is, there's plenty to talk about there. But this would create, you know, the legal pathway for timber production to happen without environmental review or public process on national scenic areas. So we're concerned about it for that reason. The other bill that I mentioned, 2936, that's in the House, it's going to be coming up for a vote likely next week. It's already passed one committee. It's in a committee this week, and I think it's supposed to pass. So within the week, we might see the bill introduced by Bruce Westerman, the Resilient Federal Forest Act, come up for a vote and pass the House. And that bill has broad implications for forest management more broadly. It's a serious threat to how forests are managed in the United States, but it has specific provisions that target southern Oregon public land. And that's what I mentioned about the Wild Rogue Wilderness, the Soda Mountain Wilderness, Cascade Siskiyou, and others being repealed in place of timber mandate, timber extraction mandate.
Are these open-ended repeals, or is that for a 5-year period or whatever, like the Endangered Species Act was originally? And sometimes they do these for certain lengths of time, or are these open-ended?
Well, my understanding is that they're permanently they're repealed. You can't log in wilderness. You can't log in most national monuments. So it would be repealing those designations and then replacing the designation with a mandate to manage primarily for timber production. So that's essentially the goal of various provisions within Westerman's Resilient Federal Forest Act.
I know our Senator Jeff, he probably would be against it, but as much as Ron Wyden is good on some things, he's not been good on forest issues. And I don't know where he stands on something like this.
Yeah,
because it isn't in his ballpark yet. But if it passes the House, doesn't it also have to go back to the Senate?
That's right. And there's actually been a Senate version that's been introduced. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it was introduced by Senator, I think, from South Dakota, Senator Thune.
It's always from back there, isn't it?
Yeah, there's...
they don't even know what a tree looks like, apparently.
Well, similar bill. It's less aggressive than the House version.
Is this from Walden's bill or the other one?
This is similar to the Westerman legislation. Yeah. We're calling it the Logging Without Laws Act. It's this forest reform, essentially, that seeks to undo so much of the progress we've made in recent decades. But there's a similar Senate version. So we're not sure how the Senate will reconcile, their version with the House version. If it passes, it's likely going to pass the House. But it just goes to show we're right now experiencing a time where the major political party that controls the White House, both houses in Congress, the majority of the Supreme Court, the majority of judgeships around the country, the majority of governors around the country, the majority of state legislators around the country, I'm sure the majority of county commissions. This is a dominant political party known as the Republican Party that is adopting these anti-public lands provisions as a part of their agenda, their policy platform, not only to erode management standards such as the Westerman legislation or Walden legislation, but also to erode public ownership itself. And I think that should be really concerning for people to know that we're kind of at this time where this party is so dominant that they're making these extreme and radical, they're making these extreme and radical proposals, basically foundational parts of their agenda. And they're pursuing it with tremendous resources and political capital, and they might be successful at a lot of it. We'll have to see if they're functional enough in Congress to pass anything.
Sure. Well, we could throw the Malheur Wildlife Refuge into the mix. What was going on over there? There's a great part of the people in the not so much the Northwest, but you get on the other side of the mountains and go through the basin and all the way over. There's a lot of people that don't like the federal government owning these lands in the name of the people, and designating areas like you're talking about in southern Oregon and the Scenic area out here. They want to, there's a lot of cattle ranchers and a lot of people that work for them and a lot of people that live in these small towns that they don't, some of them do feel a ownership of those lands as public lands, but some of them don't.
Yeah, that's important to recognize. And I always look forward to conversations I have with people that disagree with me about public land. Generally what I find is people have resentment against the federal government, and they see these lands as federal lands. They don't realize these lands actually don't belong to the federal government. They belong to Americans. They're public. The federal government is the entity that manages these lands for the public. But these lands are first and foremost public lands. And once I characterize it that way, people generally say, oh, well, those lands ought to stay public. Definitely. Like, we shouldn't sell those.
Well, they're not corporate.
Yeah, we shouldn't sell those to a logging company, but we should manage them differently. And then I say, okay, that's a conversation. But we can't have that conversation if they're privatized, because we're left out of that conversation. As long as they're public, it's a part of the democratic process. And I fully embrace the fierce debate about public lands management. But that's only a debate we can have if these lands are public to begin with.
And they've been moving against them slowly, but this is a big push. And the fire is the Eagle Creek fire is what's selling it here. But you know, it's and also the fire in Southern Oregon. But I'm sure that this movement, I don't know, Bears Ears, what the movement is there. Maybe energy. You know, they're needing energy. I don't know. But there's different places have different approaches. But it all amounts to the same thing: privatizing the public land. And once it's privatized, pretty much gone, because it's going to be drilled, it's going to be logged. It's with the incidents of oil spills and all the different things that happen down the road with energy resource extraction, they're not going to be what they were for generations. And what you're saying, I'm glad that you were able to speak to that issue, because originally I wanted to get on and talk about the fire and all that, and that's important. But that is just opening the door to something so much bigger.
Yeah, it's just one of many proposals to open up public lands for more extraction, for more exploitation by special corporate interests. Their clout is stronger than ever before. Those interests dominate our political process here in Oregon and throughout the country. And we need to have a serious conversation as a country about how we come to terms with that. The power that corporations and special interests have in our resource management, in our other public process, in our trade policy, whatever it is, we really do need to have a serious conversation about what role corporations and business play in our political process, and what role the people need to play in their democratic process.
Well, I've been saying for a long time that World War III is going to be the struggle of who's going to run the planet. It's either going to be the people or it's going to be the corporations. And that may be simplistic, but at the same time, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
If you want to frame it in those terminology, that's what's going on, because corporations, the profit motive thinks of nothing else. It doesn't take into consideration democracy. It doesn't take into consideration individual peoples, whether they're folks living near an area that they want to extract oil from, with the environmental racism and environmental justice issues. Those aren't on the table at all. And from what you're talking about down there's going to be some folks in Southern Oregon that get jobs, but they're gonna do some devastation in areas that are probably bringing in a lot more money with recreation, I would imagine. I don't know. Is that the case?
Yeah. So the area is...
I'm conjecturing there, but...
No, sure. Southern Oregon it depends on the recreation industry, and the industry is growing rapidly. I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but it's very compelling to see how the recreation outdoors industry in Southern Oregon has been growing in recent years. Of course, there's the Rogue River. There are the Cascade Mountains, there's Siskiyous. That whole area is just amazing. I hope someday to hopefully live in Southern Oregon again, because it's really, it's like, in my opinion, the best part of the state.
If you can take the heat,
Yeah, I grew up with it, so I'm used to it. You have 4 real seasons, and it's a wild, beautiful place, and there's just so much public land down there. The access is incredible. But that's how it is now. That's not to say it will be like that forever. Something else that you didn't mention in the last list that you were listing off is how corporations are also neglecting the scientific fact about climate change, how they're undermining the consensus and funding all of this misinformation, that there's still a debate out on whether or not climate change exists, whether or not humans have anything to do with the warming that we're measuring and experiencing. And that, of course, is it's going to have devastating impacts. Southern Oregon, for instance, is already experiencing devastating impacts to its recreation-based economy. A few winters ago, Mount Ashland, which is just outside of Ashland, didn't open for the whole season. We're going to see longer fire seasons continue to characterize the summer in Oregon. So drought will continually be a problem there. And that's not just Southern Oregon, that's throughout the state. The volatility of the climate will impact the entire state. So that's another issue that we all need to be cognizant of. That the scientific consensus is at war with special interests trying to undermine that scientific process.
And unfortunately, the faith-based people are kind of going up against the scientific approach.
Yeah, some. I just read today that the Catholic Church is thinking of divesting from fossil fuel,
right?
Which is a step. And there's a lot of other faith-based communities that are taking awesome steps on climate.
The Pope has been really good about it too. So we don't have but a couple of minutes left. I told you we'd eat the hour up, but I was prepared.
There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there is. But you're talking about climate change and the Columbia River. That is a whole. The Columbia Gorge is its own little funnel, in the winter and in summer both, and that is going to be altered. Who knows what the winters are going to be like with the cold wind dropping down out of southern or central Oregon and the ice that we get. That might be altered a little bit because of the mouth of it there is going to be completely changed, and we get in there and make it even worse. Who knows what that little microclimate is going to end up being in a couple of years because of what we're doing. Nobody takes into consideration 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road what these things are, what these extractive things that we do are going to cause.
Yeah.
So here we are down to a couple of minutes. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. This has been on my mind a lot, recently and over the past few years, because of our relationship with the earth has been mostly been ignored by the majority of the people, and then most of the people that pay attention to it are either activists or corporations. And I'm so thankful that there's organizations such as yours and Bark and other ones in this specific idea, but there's people fighting for climate change, and there's people fighting for so many different parts of the environment, and it's a necessary thing.
Totally.
And you got about 30-40 seconds. You want to kind of just sum up what we've been saying in an hour in a few seconds?
Well, what I would hope is that everyone who cares about public lands or cares about environmental health of the state of Oregon feels a role in the movement to protect those places. We all have to play a role in the public land that we all own. And I would urge people, whatever their opinions are, to regularly contact their legislators and make sure that they know how important these issues are. Regular phone calls, one phone call a week. That's a great way to start. I always say that to people, and I would challenge anyone watching the show to try to make one phone call a week to a rep.
And also, they can get in touch with your website. You probably got ways that people can.
That's right. Oregon Wild. Check us out. We have a lot going on in wildlife, old growth forests, public land, wild and scenic waterways, and a bunch of other stuff.
There's so much going on, and it's all kind of encapsulated right there in the Columbia River as well. Well, we're down to about 10 seconds. I want to thank folks for tuning in. I want to thank the crew. We didn't get a chance to play the video, but we'll talk about that another time. Good night for now.